This is the web platform number 39. Today we have Nick Niemeyer, Danny Blue.
Hey, everybody.
And some people from Famous. We have Steve Newcomb.
How's it going?
Who else is going to be joining us a little later? Would be
Mike O'Brien will be joining us.
Mike O'Brien. Excellent. So can you guys tell us a little about yourselves? You guys are our first, well, Steve, you are actually our first guest that we've had on twice as a guest.
Wow. Well, thank you. Glad to be here. You want me to say a little bit about myself?
Yeah, just a little bit.
So Famous is a JavaScript technology that lets you render really high fidelity, animation-rich user interfaces on a view layer across all types of devices. It's often considered a replacement for Flash. It's often considered a replacement for HTML5, and often considered a replacement for native. Best things about it: code once, deploy everywhere. Really high fidelity graphics, really high fidelity animations built in. You can build ads with it. You can build widgets with it. You can build entire websites and entire mobile apps with it.
Yeah, and we had you on in November, early November, I think was when we released the episode. It might have been actually late October we recorded, but since then there's been a lot of things that have happened. You guys did a great holiday video, which I had fun helping out with.
Yeah.
And talked about mixed mode, which we're going to chat about a little bit today. And there's a new release coming out very shortly. This is 0.035, correct?
Well, 0.35 is out there now.
Right.
And mixed mode, which we may be calling 0.4. Is that right, Mike? We don't know yet. Mixed mode is the new version of Famous that's going to be coming out.
But that is just going to be an increment of Famous. So when you say mixed mode, it will have a number associated with it.
It will have a number associated with it, yes.
Okay.
So right now 0.35 is what's out there, and a lot of people have noticed that repo has gone fairly quiet, and that's because everybody in the company is working on mixed mode. And there's quite a bit of difference between 0.35 and mixed mode. We sort of did some skunkworks projects to see if we could have a major breakthrough to really up the ante in the system. And so there's a lot of differences between 0.35 and mixed mode. So what is different? The big thing that we went for is we wanted to create what we now call mixed mode. That's not a common term, so I should probably describe what that means. 0.35 is DOM only, or HTML only rendering, but the initial version or vision of Famous was that we would be abstracted from what we rendered to. So the idea is, could we merge native and web together in the same coordinate space? So we took GL, which is WebGL in our space, and we merged it together with DOM in the same 3D coordinate space. Very difficult to do. No one has done it before. Everybody else that uses GL and DOM together uses it sort of on two different planes, and they're just not really talking to each other. But we saw DOM as a really good tool for text, for making sure that you're SEOable, for content, and for layout, where GL is a really good tool for high-fidelity graphics, lots and lots of particles, really the artistic side of whatever you're trying to create. And we had a vision that you could have the content bits and the really high-fidelity graphics bits floating around together in perfect unison in 3D space. And it took us about 8 months to solve this, but we did. And so mixed mode is mixing native and web, and it puts Famous in the unique position that a lot of people are trying to argue who will win, the web or native. And we're kind of like the lone company out there trying to say that we actually think they're going to get married, and that's how we all win at the end of the day. So mixed mode is mixing native and web together, but in pure JavaScript. And so you just include a single JS file, and then you can render ubiquitously across all devices. So that's one big difference. Difference two is we created an all-new 3D physics engine. So the physics engine in old Famous is being replaced by a much more powerful new physics engine. And then difference 3 is old Famous sat out there around 500 kilobytes. New Famous, and get ready for this, 25 kilobytes. Under one version of Famous, and then we have the advanced version of Famous, which is 57 kilobytes.
That's insane.
Yeah, especially since you said you're using GL and all these other, intense. I think of GL. I think it's like I used to do 3D Studio Max and Maya work and just modeling, but like those files were huge. I can't imagine obviously it's smaller on the web, but that's pretty crazy.
Yeah. Well, keep in mind that's the platform size. You may have assets that you're bringing in there that increase that, but we're really pretty darn proud of that.
That's very, very cool. Before we move too far past it, Steve, I wanted to make sure that we're also clear on this. This is not because there are other platforms out there that use fallbacks. So for example, so like there's a game platform out there for the web called Phaser, which will render to WebGL if it can. If it can't, it falls back to Canvas, and then it falls back to DOM. But this is not a fallback. This is using these different pieces together when it makes sense to use them. Correct?
No, we'll have a fallback too. So we go GL fallback to Famous DOM, and then if Famous DOM fails, we will fall back to something like JQuery.
Okay, all right, I see.
Yeah. No, we call it progressive de-enhancement. You have to do it on the web. You have to. So yeah, I think that's something that's just required and part and parcel of doing something that's really ready for production.
But if you are building something, you could potentially have in your app behind the scenes, again, abstracted away where you don't have to see it. You can potentially have a piece of DOM working with a piece of another piece that's working WebGL.
Yes.
Okay. I think that's a very important point to get across, that they are working together, which is why mixed mode is so cool.
Yeah, and that means eventually you could get to producing something like Halo, but making it SEOable.
Yeah, I remember you had said that last time too, and the marriage, the what you were talking about with the marriage of these things. I've been thinking about that a lot because you had mentioned it on the last episode 17, and Danny and I were having a discussion just yesterday in the break room, and it was like. He has a lot more experience with cross-platform and hybrid and different types of mobile platforms. So it's interesting to get his take on it. But I'm sort of starting to agree with you. We're leveraging these native technologies.
Yeah, I think that it's just a function for me that's just using the right tool for the right job. DOM is terrible for high-fidelity graphics. GL is wonderful at it. But GL can't render a font to save its life.
Yeah, I was just going to say.
Really hard. So it's just hey, let's just use the right tool for the right job. So we're having lots and lots of fun with it. We're released already internally here, and that's all we code on here internally.
Very cool.
So what kind of framework is going to be on top of this rendering engine? How are you going to control all this power?
Well, so we started out with 0.35 being integrated with React and Angular, Ember, and Backbone. And what we experienced is that that's an okay solution and will also still work in mixed mode. But then we, Zach, who's our VP of engineering here, came from Famous Angular. He built the Famous Angular integration. And that world of MVC we saw as being sort of very strong, but we actually felt that we had something better to offer. So we built a whole team of people to see if what could we do to provide something in that space. So what we built is not an MVC. It's actually a new architectural model that comes after MVC. And it's called BEST. And where MVC is model view controller, BEST is behavior, events, states, and tree. And it contains two things that I think that are really, or actually three things that I think that are really powerful, is that it's fully integrated into Famous. So there's no like integration project you have to do, and this like large surface area of the API between two different libraries. So whenever you're Frankensteining together two disparate libraries, you worry about each version change or each bug fix that something's going to go wackadoodle on you. But when we actually said if we go vertical and integrate deeply that, you actually get some unintended benefits that are super duper powerful, and we're already seeing those today. So BEST is an alternative to Angular, an alternative to React, an alternative to using a sort of an older MVC model. And we're already coding in it here internally, and we're trying to maximize fun, ease of use, and empowering people. And you know, I just got done the creative session setting the goals for the framework, and I want people to be able to learn how to use it with zero documentation. I want it to be so you can just read it and you know what it does. I want to get into the realm where it's 10x faster to code in the framework than it is to code on the platform raw. And the idea is that the framework will be designed to cover maybe 70% of the use cases of using Famous. And then that last 30% will still let you go right to the metal of the platform if you want to. And so we're going to be announcing and doing a show preview of BEST on May 20th at an event here in the city. And so people are going to see BEST for the first time. And you know, BEST is a great acronym because then we're kind of like, Angular's good, React is better, but only BEST is best. So Zach, our VP of Engineering, who's a budding head of marketing, is extremely proud of his acronym. So that's what BEST is going to be. And it's just super fun to build in BEST, is the best way I can say it. I think you could take somebody who just finished their first class on Code Academy, and I think they could be building world-class interfaces very, very quickly.
So you think it's going to be well received? Like, so do you, especially, so you're saying, like, again, so you're saying, so like this MV star, MVC, whatever, is good, but you think that this way that you're handling it is better. How do you think people are going to receive that?
I think 50% of the people are going to love it. 30% of the people are going to be like, okay, I'll check this out, and I'll get death threats from 20% of the people, as usual.
Sounds about right. Sounds about par for the course.
That's our community, so you got to take
it.
You got to take it as it is, you know. You know, I think that we'll still integrate with Angular, we'll still integrate with Ember, we'll still integrate with React. Those are great tools. We just thought we had something to say here in the space, and you know, one of the big questions that a lot of people have had, and many of the death threats come, is that there's been a rumor that we're going to change our licensing. 0.3.5 is under the Mozilla public license, and it's a pure open source license. And there was a lot of rumor speculating that we were going to go away from an open source license and have a for-page for model. There was rumor that we were going to charge for GL or charge for the better physics engine and make a lesser version of Famous free. There's all sorts of rumors flying around what we're doing. So I can actually clear it up. We are changing our licensing, but we're becoming more open source. We're going to pure MIT for both all of Famous and all of our framework.
No death threats for that one.
I'm sure I'll get some. Yeah.
Somebody will be unhappy.
And what that really does is frees us up to help make Famous just go everywhere. So with the 25 KB version of Famous and 57 KB version of Famous, we're busily now working with companies to load Famous by default. So imagine if the Famous framework were loaded by default in a browser. Imagine it's loaded by default in jQuery or Twitter Bootstrap. It's just, imagine a scenario in which just it's already loaded, you know it's already there, and you actually have zero footprint to start off with, and you just build your app file, and your app file becomes your only footprint.
So similar to like Sizzle in jQuery, where it's just a micro library inside.
There's many incantations on how we'll do it, and what you'll see first is the famous jQuery widgets come out. So look for that. Beyond that, I don't want to say because we're still working on it. But I do know that the famous jQuery widgets will be coming out.
We finally got our animation expert, Rachel Neighbors. She just came on.
Great.
So just wanted to say hello.
Hey guys.
Hey.
I was a little late because I couldn't find a link in, so I'm just being quiet for now. I missed a lot.
Okay.
Okay.
So we're super proud that we're going to go MIT. It just means that everybody can use it completely unencumbered, and it's even a better license than the Mozilla public license. So that's going to be formally announced May 20th, but I'm happy to share it with you guys today because it's something that we battled for during the 8 months we were creating mixed mode. It was quite a battle over what license we were going to do it under. And we did look at all of those different models that were rumored to have been happening. But the values that I think that I want to project as me running this company is we have to put this in the hands of everybody. And MIT is the only way to... You either are open source or you're not. There's yes and there's everything else. And MIT is the license that says yes. And that comes with a lot of responsibility. We need to be very good stewards of our own MIT project. And so now the main thing on my mind is support. And how do we build great documentation, great tutorials, and make it easy to use. And so with the framework, we'll be building a ton of tutorials in Famous University for the framework.
That's awesome. I mean, that's very, very cool and very good to. I'm not gonna lie, because Steve did not tell us exactly what he said. Like, I have something to say about the licenses, but he didn't say exactly what it was. So then when he started talking about the stuff, I was like, uh-oh, what is he gonna say? So he scared me for a minute. But that's awesome. That's really, really good news.
You definitely don't want a license where the lawyers are gonna like kill you.
Yeah, actually, that was one of the big things, is that any license we looked at that wasn't actually a pure yes, it's open source, it suddenly then everyone that worked with us had to bring in a lawyer to understand the terms. And I was like, that's not what I want to have with a relationship with the people who use Famous. I don't want them to need to bring in a lawyer to understand what they can and cannot do with Famous. And that was actually one of the deciding factors. I just didn't want what I call an encumbered license. I just want something everybody's like, yep, I know what that is. Done. So the whole motto we used in the licensing is there's yes and there's everything else. It's kind of a motto we use in a lot of things here at Famous.
That's great. So last time we had you on, you were talking about a lot of this jQuery stuff was first kicking up, and you were talking about redoing some of these components, redoing a lot of like the jQuery plugins with Famous, and how you're going to kind of not really package those. You talked a lot about containers. I think you referenced Docker as things from the back end. So have you guys been doing any more work with front-end containers?
Yeah, we've made a lot of progress there. So we have it down to exactly one line of code with a UUID that can pull in a full container. And the container can be anything from an ad to a widget to a full app. And it's one line of code. It's amazing. And so what you do now is you actually host and store whatever your Famous project is. Just say it's a widget, a carousel widget that's on your website. You host that on the Famous Hub, which is a new thing that we're going to be announcing as well. So you get a free account, and you get free hosting, free CDN, free analytics, free everything you can imagine. And then you have all of your Famous projects. Think of it as like GitHub, but for Famous. And you can put your code up there, but it's actually, you can have develop, test, and deploy within Hub. And then each develop, test, and deploy just gives you a UUID code that you just slap in any website, and then suddenly whatever you're developing pops up there live. And the container is a very powerful concept because it's a system in a box. And we took the notion that Docker has on the back end and brought it to the front end. So if you have an existing website built in Bootstrap, or you have an existing mobile app built in Ionic, if you have anything built in any technology, you can now just add a famous container, which is just a div, and now you can put famous anywhere you want, and you can kind of upgrade your interface to famous one widget at a time instead of doing a full replatforming. And that was really important to me because I always hated as a developer when someone said to me, like, this is killer new technology. All you have to do is hit delete on all your good work you've done to date. And I'm always like, man, that sucks. So we wanted to be something that people could use in their existing projects. So, and what's fascinating, because mixed mode is a marriage between native and web, you can add a container to a website just as easily as you can add a container to an Objective-C app. So you can put a famous container inside of a native app or inside of a web project. Either way, it doesn't matter. And then that container hooks you back into the hub on the back end. And the hub is where you manage everything from your source of your project. You're still using GitHub as your repo, but you're managing is like, here's my production version of my project. You can have as many as you want, and then for each you can do things like compress, and you'll see that when you're in development, famous is 500 KB, but you hit a single button and it knocks it down to 25 KB. You can do then either the free version of our analytics or the more enterprise version of analytics. And so hub is this area where you're managing your famous assets that you've created, your famous containers. So think hub is master, hub has containers. Actually, no, hub has accounts, and in your account you have containers, and then those containers have UUIDs in a single line of code. You just put that in your website, or you can do it in a web view in a native app, and it just pops up and shows up. And then one of the fascinating things we've built into this is the ability to do live updating to a container. So this is another major announcement. With sub 100 millisecond delays, sometimes in the range of 20 milliseconds, you can live update the content within and the data and everything within a container live through a socket. This is huge for building ads in Famous. This is huge for building widgets or different experiences where as a user comes into a UI, they may be sent down several different storyboard paths depending on who they are and what they're trying to do. So it's kind of like, think of some of the types of things that Meteor offers. That's going to be built into Hub and Famous.
So on that note, with the Hub and containers actually specifically, one of the things that I watch out for is with Flash, right? It was great. It did a lot of awesome things, but it is a black box, and integrating with it, you'd have to use XML sockets, and it wasn't really viable. You had to get a Flash developer, or you had to go in there. But it seems like you're taking the approach of, this is a container. It's like sort of like an iframe, but you can work with it similar with sockets, but you can also edit the code directly because it's just JavaScript. Am I correct in that assumption?
Yeah, I actually had sat down with Venu Venugopal, the guy who created Maya and Flash, and I was like, what if we just recreated Flash in JavaScript? And he's like, oh, it's not fast enough. I'm like, what if I told you it was? He's like, I hate you. That's an awesome idea. He's like, and yeah, but that's basically it. It's Flash, but take every problem that ever existed in Flash and then hit delete. Is kind of one of the strategies I've been using the past 4 years.
Yeah, that's very bold but very cool. Like it's interesting because it's not that people didn't like the things that Flash did. It just became a big pain with plugins and all that stuff.
Yeah, we had a simple rule: no download, no plugin, no browser dependencies that we didn't like, no funkiness. We didn't want to use LiveScript. We want to use JavaScript. It's kind of it's a simple list. You can actually write down, like, I love Flash except for, and then write a list. And then we just went about deleting that list.
That's very cool.
What about the accessibility and SEO of these containers?
Mm-hmm. So two different topics, accessibility and SEO. So you can use a reader against Famous. Mark and I have been really, it's really important that we embed accessibility thinking into Famous from the get-go. We're young, we're a brand new library, and mixed mode is brand new, but that's something that's super important to Mark and I right from the beginning, right from the get-go. SEO, Famous is SEOable. You know, the periodic table, if Google looks at it, it sees the periodic table. We treat text like text, and that's why.
Now, back in the day of Flash, many ActionScript developers would tell you you can make Flash accessible and work with SEO as well. But very few developers actually bothered with that. How difficult is it to implement these features for them? Like, is this something that's sort of on by default, or does it require somebody to actually be thinking about it?
Right. That's a great question. So with Flash, Flash code itself is what's called dark matter to Google. So I have a lot of painful experience in this area. My previous company before Famous was PowerSet, which became Microsoft Bing. And I have really dealt with the pains of trying to SEO Flash. The way you SEO Flash is by appending metadata to Flash, and that's a very black-hatable and trickable technique. And so nobody really used it because nobody ever took it seriously, because the actual Flash app is compiled. It's hidden. It's dark matter to Google. It can never read it. Native code, Objective-C, Java, C# is all dark matter to a search engine, and there's nothing that you can do to make it SEOable that isn't black-hatable and trickable. And that's why people don't use metadata techniques in order to get true SEO. True SEO is done by DOM and a tree structure where inside of a div there's simply text and a crawler can crawl it. And that happens automatically in a browser. And the correct way of doing SEO is producing your website or your mobile website in a way that a traditional Google crawler with no modifications can simply ingest that website and SEO it correctly without any funky metadata. So there is nothing to do to make something SEOable and Famous. You simply have text as text.
But so you could potentially, I mean, this part is up to developers. You could potentially put yourself in a corner if, so for example, if you're building some sort of app where you're rendering almost entirely in WebGL and Canvas or something like that, somehow you've avoided actually using DOM, like with mixed mode.
Yeah,
so, but that's just up to you as a developer.
Oh, you can always screw yourself. Yeah, if GL is dark matter to Google, Canvas is dark matter to Google, the only thing that is readable by Google is DOM and some ways SVG. But yeah, you want to use DOM for text, and if you break that rule and use the wrong tool for text, you also will not be SEOable.
So there's no built-in tools to help with ARIA or anything like that. It's just basically what you would normally do with ARIA. You would have to know those techniques and implement it as normal within the container.
Yes, and that's what you want. Yeah.
Cool. You talked about I don't mean to keep hijacking stuff, but you talked a little bit about Famous University, or you mentioned a little bit about it. So it's been very cool for developers, especially when you first launched in your big secretive launch type of stuff, and when people first started to get a hold of it, it was really nice. So how's Famous University been updated?
It's fun because we're now using containers. So each tutorial is a tutorial inside of a container. And you can now live code inside the container, and it actually auto-stores to your hub account. So you can take tutorials and then save them inside of your hub account to look at them later. You can, we now are releasing widgets as a container, and you can release a widget as a public container. You know how when you right-click and say on a Flash object, you know it's Flash because it has the Flash controls? Imagine on a Famous widget, you right-click and the word fork appears. So you can see a widget you like, and if it's a public widget, you can fork it into your Famous repo and then begin working on it. And so we wanted to create this notion that like a Famous container almost acts like a YouTube video, except for the code is editable, and you can just automatically pop it into your Hub account. And then in the famous university tutorials, the tutorials themselves all are containers, and even containers can have containers. So it's kind of a little neat rabbit hole that you go down into. But basically, a tutorial now can be any typical web page, and you can add N containers that do live coding within that environment. And so it's nice now. The original form of Famous University was actually a Famous app, 100%, running the Famous code. We've gotten it down now to you can build Famous University inside of Twitter Bootstrap. So you just do a normal old Bootstrap website, and you can just inject Famous containers as the coding lessons in there and have prose around it that are simple HTML text. We have an example of Famous University built in WordPress, even. It's so really the modularity of containers and the shareability and portability of containers allow us to teach a lesson anywhere. So say Smashing Magazine wants to write a tutorial about Famous, or any designer or developer wants to write a tutorial about Famous, they can simply write markup code and then include a couple containers that are in their hub to show the demonstrations of what they're talking about. So we wanted to make writing tutorials a social thing that anyone can do, not just us.
Now, when you did university, when you talked about it originally, you had said that your vision was to have it where anybody can teach anything with this. And so with the containers, it does seem like that's possible. Has that vision kind of come to fruition, or is it in process still, or?
Oh, I think that's a very long process. But yeah, I want people to teach anything using Famous technology. The ultimate vision I have as Famous University is, say you're coding on a project and you have a problem. I want to have a budget big enough so that you can just hit a button and then you can share you can share a mentor into your code on your Hub account, and they'll just join your session. And then you have a live person, just like we're talking to each other over Google Hangouts. Imagine you can just feel like, boop, and then someone's helping you and staring at your code right away, and that's just a free service provided by Famous for everybody. And I want to get away from this, like, I need to submit a bug request or submit this or submit this. I really want people to be able to just go, boop, and then get somebody.
That's cool. It's a very interesting idea.
Yeah, we need to raise a lot of money to be able to afford that.
It sounds like you guys have a lot of plans for your infrastructure as well, for what Famous is, as well as just the Famous library platform that people are building on now.
Yeah, I kind of divide Famous into two halves. One is the view layer half, which is the platform and the framework together, and that's MIT licensed. And then there's the hub and all the services that you can get within the hub, and that's free, and that's a service, a cloud service that you just join. And building the hub is just as big of a project as building the view layer. So in the hub, we have our own CDN, our own compression services. There's a lot of work going on. Probably half our team is now the hub.
Cool. Very cool.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we're getting ready to dive into some stuff about Spartan, some ES6 stuff. Does anybody else have any other questions? Do you want to ask before we switch gears a little bit? Okay.
Yeah. I'm gonna get Mike O'Brien. He's the head of our platform team.
Okay.
And he can talk about Spartan, ES6, all sorts of stuff. And I'm going to hand it over to him, and then I'll come back after he's done.
Awesome. Thank you. We'll talk to you here in a little bit.
Yep. Great. Sit here so you're not silhouetted by the sun.
Hey, how's it going?
Hey, Mike.
How you doing?
How are you?
Hi, Mike.
Doing well.
Cool. So we've been promised lots of very good information from you.
I'll try to deliver.
So, Eric, you want to go ahead and talk about some of the Spartan stuff?
Indeed. Okay. So I was looking at some of the things that Spartan and IE support is doing for CSS that we talked about in last episode with Steve. And one of the things was Preserve 3D, and that's going to be supported moving forward. I think it's being worked on now, and SVG transformations as well.
Yep. I think they have Preserve 3D in IE10 right now. But yeah, it'll be used going forward, supported going forward.
Okay. And does that, like, because of that, you now have less to polyfill per se?
Yeah, pretty much.
Is that going to affect performance even more?
Yeah, it's more so that like we just kind of don't work before IE10. The whole idea is that you could have used Famous to do a lot of positioning and stuff, but it would have been in a completely 2D environment. Like anything with depth or anything to give like the illusion of like three-dimensional space just can't happen without Preserve 3D. So while we could have done like vertical translation and stuff like that and animations that like just on like a piece of paper style kind of thing, you couldn't really do anything in 3 dimensions. So super happy to have that implemented.
Very cool. And there's some interesting stuff in ES6 too with dealing with math and numbers as well. Is that going to help with calculations? Because you were using, in the earlier version, you were using matrix transforms with CSS. So with the WebGL, is math as important with this? For the
So we still do like a lot of the math, like do all of our scene graph calculations, CPU side, and then pretty much like pass these like matrices that describe where something is in three-dimensional space to the browser. And through Matrix 3D for DOM, straight to the graphics card for GL. So the idea is that like we're still going to have to do all that math like our side. While ES6 does have like a lot of cool features for stuff like that, it's hard for us to adopt those because performance is such like a really, really important kind of thing for us. So for instance, like if you in ES5 even, they had 4 each for arrays.
Yeah.
And like the native for each for an array is something ridiculous, like 5 to 6 times slower than iterating over an array using a for loop yourself.
Yeah.
So it's hard, like we can't really use a lot of ES6 features just because we don't really, we don't know like what the performance costs are going to be versus like just doing the base iterations ourselves. And the other thing is like, it's, how do the browsers implement the ES6 features, but then also how does, transpilers like the Google Closure Compiler or Babel, like 6 to 5 now, I think. I forget what it turned
Other way
into.
around.
Babel.
Other way around.
Now it's Babel.
Okay. But yeah, so I don't know like exactly, if we use an ES6 feature, what they transpile that back into for ES5 backward support. So so we use so basically the entire platform right now, because it's so like performance sensitive, is using like full ES5 features and like not even a lot of like the new, more up-to-date features. But personally, I'm a big fan of like a lot of the changes, and I know for like a lot of our demos and everything that we do, I write them in 6. And I use the module syntax for everything. I think that's incredibly useful. Use the class structure for a lot of stuff. A lot of the stuff that's like more application architecture focused instead of like like lower level things. Like we can use because it doesn't really like have an impact. It's just kind of more of like a code organization improvement. So really big fan of like what that does for the language in terms of that.
Because now you guys are using, so like I know that you have like a browser 5 version or a common JS version, I guess more specifically. Yeah. But so are you going to be, because I think all the stuff that was in Famous University was the AMD module pattern. And there was a, because I remember when I was messing around with it, I was using Browserify and everything was working fine with that. So do you want to, so it's the kind of thing where do you guys want to, if you're not using like something like ES6, you're talking about modules. So like, are you guys using modules now and transpiling down so that people can use it, or is it that something that you guys want to be doing, or something that at some point you just, well, whenever it's supported, whenever that will someday be?
So right now, currently, the platform is written in Common and uses Browserify. Mostly, we don't need Browserify, but we use it for some of the GL stuff. If you use it, it's some nice, so you can like compile shaders into your program at build time. So really, really like it for that. That being said, I think it's the idea that like we're personally fans of like using Common for internal stuff, but the idea is like when we put it out there, hopefully we could have a AMD version and have a global build and have an ES6 version of everything. But for right now, we're just using Common just because speed of development is really good for us.
That's cool. I like Common. Of the AMD or Common, I like Common better. But especially with things like Babel, they have like Browserify transforms.
Yeah, that's what we use for most of our stuff.
Yeah, so you can just say. So it just makes it for anybody that hasn't done it, just makes it a very clean process because you can just hook up your Browserify project the same way that you normally hooked up your Browserify project, and then just add. I think they call it Babelify or something like that to run through, and then it will automatically run through the whole process for you. So anybody that's interested in it and hasn't looked it up, it gets very. It's actually a very clean implementation if you want to start using the module pattern, which again the new module pattern. Sorry, the new module pattern that ES6 or I guess ES7 has is really nice. It's a really good way to say it.
So Mike, you said the performance is such a big deal, and we've known that from the last few releases you guys have done, and also when Steve was on last time. So do you have any public benchmarks and testable ways to validate this performance?
Yeah, so we have a lot of stuff for the mixed mode platform right now. Starting to build up some more, internal people that are doing, pretty much strictly performance testing for us. But right now, nothing's public. But the idea is that, it'll be hooked up so that, when we make new updates, you can see like exactly what functions, got hit hard or what functions got optimized. And so performance is definitely like the name of the game for us. But it's also a lot of it's also garbage collection. So we make a pretty concerted effort in the platform to make as little garbage as humanly possible, which is hard to do in JavaScript. So, envious of like a lot of platforms and a lot of these frameworks out there have the ability to like create garbage because they're not running so often. So they have the luxury of like making these like really, really nice concise APIs that have like are incredibly user friendly. Because the idea that like you can just have an array that returns function, or like have a function that returns an array or returns an object, and that's something that we can't really do on a per frame basis. Otherwise, like you're going to hit big GC cycles all the time, and you're going to notice like jank in your application. So that's a big thing for us. It's like not just runtime performance, but just making sure we have like a framework that it has a decent amount of like upfront allocation, but then on a frame by frame basis, and if it's not like throwing away as much as possible.
Is there some part of the framework code that you feel could use a bit more love that didn't get much love?
Yeah. So the idea is that kind of why Steve talked about like where 0.35 is and why we're kind of like moving to mixed mode. The big thing is that pretty much the way current frameworks works is like when we traverse our tree, there's like a big structure that gets created, and that defines like what is like where everything is in three-dimensional space, and like that's a big object, and that object is like incredibly large. Like it can be like 30 megabytes a frame or something like that.
Wow.
So that was pretty much the biggest optimization for us is to get rid of all that garbage. And taking a fresh approach to the way we like treat our like our scene graph and our hierarchies, and the kind of thing where if nothing is changing in your application, if nothing is moving, like we actually don't need to do anything. So being smart about like saving battery through like not doing performance, like not doing things we don't need to, and then also just making sure that like we do it in a very garbage efficient way.
Cool. So is that pretty much what you have to? So when you're talking about not creating garbage because of the way that JavaScript works, that's kind of how you have to manage your garbage collection is by creating as little as possible.
Yeah.
But so, like, are are there certain techniques that you guys try to do to try to limit that footprint, or they're just, like I said, so you mentioned things that run every 60 frames, not having functions that are just creating these new things in memory every time it runs. Are there certain techniques or patterns you guys use to help avoid that?
Yeah, definitely. So like one of the ideas is, in 0.35, like let's say you wanted something that was defining your size on a per frame basis, right? So I would do something, and like in 0.35, you could have a function that returns an array that's like a 3x3, or like in 0.35 a 2x2 or a 2-element array that's like your width and your height, and you call that every time, and you get a little array that tells you what your size is for that frame. What the equivalent would be in mixed mode is like you would have like a size object, and you would call a function that would set the size on it, and that thing would already have a pre-allocated array for you, and you would call a method that would then like update the values inside of that array. So you like trade this, like you trade your upfront cost of like having a struct that like is your API for changing the size, and like creating and like holding on to that piece of memory, versus like not having a less upfront cost, but then just like willy-nilly like making garbage and throwing it away and making it and throwing it away. So it's a lot of like persistent state that you kind of like hold on to, and then just like interact with the APIs. And we try to make it so that we're not holding on to like a ton of state and doing a lot of because that's the big gross part about a lot of this, and why a lot of stuff is moving to like super functional stuff, is because you end up in like just a mess of like holding on to way too much state. So yeah, it's a balancing act, but that's kind of like the main technique.
Definitely sounds like let's call it an interesting challenge.
Yeah, exactly.
But very, very cool. Yes, I'm sorry. I know we need to start wrapping up soon. I know we're starting to run up against our time. Do you guys have any other questions pertaining to this?
No, but I found the discussion of state of building state very interesting.
Yeah. All right. Well, Nick, you got anything else before we lose this guy and get Steve back?
This guy, it's nice.
No,
Cool.
Seriously, thank you very, very much.
Yeah, of course. It was nice meeting you guys.
Awesome. It was nice to meet you too.
All right, take care. Hey guys.
Hey Steve.
Welcome back.
Hopefully that was valuable.
It absolutely was. It was interesting to hear about how some of the technical differences between 3.5 and mixed mode, like some of the ways that some of those things are being handled is pretty interesting. I referred to it as an interesting challenge before, and I will stick to that. I think that's the best way to think about it.
Mm-hmm.
Mike had a really well-rounded knowledge of the framework, from what we could tell.
Oh yeah, I mean he's been here forever.
You hope so, right?
Yeah. He's been living and breathing it for a while. Cool.
So we're running out of time here. There's a few announcements, right, that you'd wanted to do, Steve, or am I incorrect in that?
Well, we did many of them, and that's that were the framework best and the famous view layer platform are going to all be MIT pure, and that's kind of a big one.
Yeah.
And then when we do launch that, everybody gets a free hub account to manage all of their projects, and you don't have to use it, but you can. And there's all sorts of like cool compression, CDN hosting. There's just all sorts of. The idea there is to make it like really valuable on the back end, so that you can marry your front end of your widget with upgrading your back end, and you can kind of upgrade your world one widget at a time. So it's going to be really easy to dabble in Famous and like say, hey, for this one widget on my site, I'm going to try Famous, and then you go boom. Hopefully people will see that they can really build super beautiful things across everything and have ubiquity, and they can feel. We always test to see, are people having fun? Do they feel really like, oh my God, like a memorable experience using Famous for the first time? And are they getting the reach they want so that it works everywhere? And I think if we get people to see that, it's a very empowering experience. And it's something we've been going after for 4 years, and we'll be going after for 4 more. And it's gonna be a big effort to do that. And in May 20th, we're going to give that preview, and then June 22nd, we have our joint event with jQuery. And we've actually, the jQuery event on the 22nd is actually not going to be about jQuery per se. We've actually invited the founders of almost every platform out there and a lot of killer speakers. And that event is going to be just a great event to hear like what's what from the leaders in the industry. And then we're going to share some new news that I can't even share now, but because it's still in process. Some new news at that as well. And then we're going to have a big event in the fall. And what's amazing is we've already released mixed mode internally and to some core partners. Some interesting ways that people are using Famous. One of the ways is ads. And I could show you a cheat if I can find my phone. So, you know, this will only be at 24 frames per second because Google Hangouts is only at 24 frames per second. But we have a lot of fun building now full interstitial ads in Famous, even the iWatch. So imagine that this type of an ad that actually has a 30-second playtime is done by a designer, not even a developer. And this can fit inside of the Twitter native app or Facebook native app or any native app for that matter. Instead of having a sponsored tweet take you out of Twitter, it actually could keep you in Twitter. Instead of it taking you out of Facebook, it keeps you in Facebook. Or you could be on a mobile website and you see a little tickler and then you hit this and this comes up as this full ad. And if you can see here, it's also interactive.
Oh, that's pretty cool.
See all the different versions of iWatch here.
And that is built with mixed mode.
This is mixed mode. You know, this is Coin, which is a new. If you can see that is a new credit card. You know, you can flip it. And these are the types of ads that are being created in Famous. And these take. You know, I'm trying to get these guys to take so that I can build these live on stage. And you can see that this is interactive with the accelerometer in the device. So this has access to a lot of native features as well.
For those who are just listening to audio, this is a three-dimensional WebGL, right? Spinning watch and coin using the accelerometer and the GL interface.
Right. And then, oh, wait a minute, let me see if I can get this last one here.
Okay.
Where is it? We'll have to save the most famous one for another time because I don't see it on here. We also now are doing like some of these ads are full actual apps. We're blurring the line between what's an ad, what's an app, what's a widget. And then a lot of people ask us about games. So
yeah, what about those games?
So if you think of it as, like when people say, do you guys build websites? I say no. Go use Twitter Bootstrap, go use Angular, go use WordPress, go use what you normally would use, and use us for your hero moment widgets. When people say, do you guys build mobile apps? You know, sure, we can build a mobile app. We've had, you know, we do things like, you know, like one of the apps that won all the awards in the early days was Yahoo Weather, and this is Yahoo Weather, if you guys remember. And it has like a Gaussian blur. It has tricky animations going on that would be impossible in HTML, and it has the very famous double helix or double parallaxing going on. This was built in Famous Pure. But I always say to people, like, you know, I think that you can. If you want to use Ionic to build your mobile app, go use it. If you want to use Angular to build your mobile app, go use it. Just use us for your hero moments. In a game, can you build a full game in Famous? Yep, people have built Flappy Birds and social games, things like that. Do I tell people to build games in Famous? No. I think the killer use for Famous is to build the UI HUD for the game would be a killer use of Famous. I think thinking of game objects, like Unity 3D has the notion of prefabs. So I think prefabs built in Famous make a ton of sense. But if I were building a game, I'd use Unity 3D or Unreal 4 or one of those engines. And then I look in the long term to be integrating Famous as a default option in there to maybe build a couple of your widgets that you maybe want Famous layout for. So do I think that some people are going to use Famous to build a full game? Yes, but the framework, the best framework we're offering, is not what you would use to build that game. That's an example of the 30% that falls outside the framework. So if you wanted to build a game in Famous, you would be coding right to the metal of the platform, and we aren't building a framework to help you build a game as of now. That's still outside the scope of what we're going to be able to be creating.
Could be useful in interactive storytelling. I'll be interested to see what people do with that.
Yes, but again,
Who does
that'll be
interactive storytelling these days, though, Rachel?
Oh, I wouldn't know anything about that.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are going to be doing that too. And it's wonderful to see what people use Famous for. Half the time people come in, we have no idea what people are doing with Famous. We have Hewlett-Packard built a new computer that has two screens simultaneously touch, and they're powering it with some Famous technology. We had no idea people would do that.
That's really cool.
Yeah, and with Famous being MIT, it's just like, hey, like, we're not stopping you. Just use it however you want.
Yeah, no, all that stuff sounds really, really awesome. We need to wrap up now, but Steve, tell people how they can get in touch with you if they want to, like I said, if they want to mess around in the source code of Famous. How can they get in touch with you? How can they get in touch with Mike? How can they contribute? All that good stuff.
Yeah, so we have a program called Famous Labs that if people want to get early looks at mixed mode, they can come here and beat on it and tell us what's wrong with it. We can fit up to 60 people in Famous Labs, and we offer free office and free food and drink and stuff like that. We do a demo day every Thursday at 5 p.m. at the office that's open to the public. We typically have, sometimes as many as 60 people show up to watch that. If you want to come to Famous Labs, you can email Miles at Famous, MYLES, at famo.us. If you want to come to Demo Day, you can email Sarah, S-A-R-A, at Famous. And if you want to praise me, yell at me, advise me, I am Steve at Famous.
And maybe you'll do a traveling show up here in Portland sometime.
We hope to, and we actually do a lot of meetups, and we have a now green screen TV studio here on location. So if anybody does a meetup, we can green screen into that meetup and actually have the entire team available for the meetup. And a lot of people are taking advantage of that because they want, like, Mike O'Brien directly to ask direct platform questions or something like that. It's a really good use of it. And yeah, we're trying to hire more people so that we can go traveling to meet all of the people that are looking at Famous. So hopefully we can do a lot more of that.
Cool. If people wanted to get in touch with Mike, do you know Mike's Twitter handle offhand?
We don't give out Mike's contact info. Sorry. You could probably guess his email though. And my Twitter handle's just at Steve Newcomb. If a lot of people tweet me these days, so if you tweet me out, I tweet back.
Awesome.
Very cool. Well, thank you very much, Steve.
Okay, I'm happy to be of help.
Yeah, thanks a lot. I really appreciate you coming on.
Seems like you guys are doing even more amazing stuff, so thank you for coming on again. It's been a pleasure.
Well, thanks for having me, and you guys are the folks that inspire us to do Famous in the first place, and I just couldn't be prouder that we were able to finally get it done under MIT. So let as many people as you want know. I think it'll be leaking out soon.
Oh, we'll be tweeting it.
Absolutely.
All right, guys. Any way I can help, just let me know.
All right.
Absolutely. Thank you, Steve.